see.
Thank you very much, Benina. There have been celebrations across Sudan after the ruling military council and a coalition of opposition and protest groups reached an agreement to share a power sharing agreement during a transition period. But protest groups warn that if the agreement is not implemented, they'll go back onto the streets. The agreement is expected to lead to elections after months of protests.
After 2 days of talks, the Transitional Military Council and the Forces for Freedom and Change reached a consensus on the makeup of the Sovereign Council. The council will have 5 seats allotted to the military and 5 allotted to civilians. The presidency of the council will be rotated over a 3-year transition period.
We thank the African and Ethiopian mediators for their efforts and patience. We also thank our brothers in the Forces for Freedom and Change for their good spirit. Would like to reassure all political forces, armed movements, and all those who participated in the change, from young men and women, that this agreement will be comprehensive and will not exclude anyone, and will also live up to the ambitions of the Sudanese people and its pure revolution.
Both the African Union and Ethiopian mediators had looked to help both parties reach a consensus.
The parties have also agreed upon forming a civilian government called the Government of Independent, Skillful Patriotism, headed by a Prime Minister of similar qualities. Finally, both sides have agreed upon postponing the establishment of Legislative Council until the Sovereign Council and civilian government is in order.
The agreement comes after weeks of deadlock between both parties. Tension rose as security forces violently dispersed a sit-in at Khartoum's army headquarters. The June 3rd dispersal left over 100 people dead.
This agreement opens the path for establishment of transitional bodies which will begin executing reformation programs in all social, political and economic aspects, the first of which is the issue of peace and the independent investigations and punishment of the killers of the martyrs.
On the streets, the agreement was met with celebrations. But citizens warned they were willing to return to the streets if they weren't content.
The freedom and change movement is the leadership, but the real leadership is the street. Simultaneously, our tools are still in place. Today, they formed a council. If we like it, then fine. But if we do not like it, then our tools are still in place. We are ready to activate these tools, escalate, and start over. There is no need to diverge in the end. Our government will be a civilian one, despite what anyone says.
I'm sending a message to the Freedom and Change movement and to the military council. If you work well, then fine. If you do not, look at the past 4 or 5 months. We will take to the streets for the 4th and 5th time until we find the Sudan we want to live in.
Both parties agreed to postpone the establishment of a legislative council. Astatal, CGTN.
Meanwhile, the African Union says its position on Sudan remains that power must be handed over to civilians. The AU has, however, welcomed the progress that has seen military leaders and the opposition alliance agree to a transition plan. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi reports now from Addis Ababa.
Sudan will remain suspended from the African Union until it can show progress towards power being totally in the hands of civilians. Opposing Sudanese factions have now adopted a proposal along the lines African Union suggested for the country. The parties have agreed to a 3-year transition period. Control of a sovereign council will rotate between the two sides, and an independent technocratic government will be formed. The African Union says both sides agree that violence seen in recent weeks will also be investigated. A planned mass protest on July 13th may not happen since both sides now have agreed to a dialogue. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, staying in Sudan, 235 members of the Sudan Liberation Movement have been released from prison. The movement has been fighting the government since 2003. The move by the military council looks to reach a peace agreement with rebel groups in the Darfur region. Authorities announced that the prisoners who were released were not wanted in connection with other cases.
We are celebrating the issuance of the decision by the President of the Transition Military Council to grant a general amnesty for 235 prisoners of the Sudan Liberation Movement, and we are celebrating their return.
Elsewhere, the African continent is set to make history through the launch of the Free Trade Area as the Africa Union leaders meeting kicks off in Niamey in Niger. The Free Trade Area aims to bring together the 54 members of African Union into a single market. This will see the removal of trade barriers such as tariffs across Africa. Agenda 2063, which focuses on development in Africa, is also set to be discussed. But the fluid situation in Sudan is likely to dominate talks since most African leaders have been meeting over the crisis in Khartoum. Well, now let's bring in CG10's Rama Nyang, who is live for us in Niamey in Niger. Rama, what's on the agenda for this meeting?
I think, Karen, there's quite a bit on the agenda as far as this Continental Free Trade Area Summit is concerned. Just to give our viewers a bit of background on this, remember back in March, countries across the continent sat down and said, yes, we'd like to create a free trade area. And the threshold that they set for themselves to actually have that deal coming into force was to have 22 countries not just sign that particular treaty, but also ratify it as well. We got to that point by the end of April, and of course 30 days thereafter it eventually comes into force. What the leaders are essentially going to be coming to do at this particular point in Niger is fairly straightforward. Look at essentially how this entire trade deal is going to work. What are the rules of origin? How are payments going to be made? When you're talking about scheduling tariffs, for instance, and how to roll those back or remove them entirely, what's a schedule towards that process? All of those are essential elements of what we'll be discussing in the next 48 hours, and hopefully by Sunday we'll have an agreement in place and a clear roadmap for businesses and economies across Africa, at least the 25 that have ratified this deal at this point in time, to essentially work with and trade and invest amongst themselves over the next couple of decades. Karen?
And Rama, the Agenda 2063, that seems to be the major focus, but there's so much going on in member countries like Sudan. Do we expect any major statements on this from Niamey?
Well, we've looked at the program of events at this end of the world, and officially it's not on the agenda, not yet at this point in time. But as you pointed out, we will have several heads of state here from different regional economic blocs around this particular part of the world. So you'll have representatives from IGAD, the East African Community, COMESA, just about everyone from the north all the way down to the south will be present for this particular event. We're also expecting to hear from the head of the AU Commission, Mustafa Faki Mohammed. He's actually in town at this point in time. And of course, the current chair of the African Union, the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, later on, in fact, twice on Sunday and later on Monday as well. With those specific press conferences, we do expect that the matter of Sudan will certainly come up in either of those two events. But officially, as far as the program is concerned, Sudan isn't really on the agenda, at least not at this point in time.
Okay, thanks for that update. That was CG10's Rama Nyang there, live for us in Niamey in Niger. Moving on to other news now. The Tunisian Prime Minister Youssef Chahed has decided on Friday to ban the niqab in public institutions, citing security reasons. The Muslim face veil covers the entire face apart from the eyes and can potentially be used as a disguise or to escape justice. This ban comes at a time of heightened security following a June the 27th double suicide bombing in Tunis that left 2 dead and 7 wounded. The niqab and other outward shows of Islamic devotion were not tolerated under the regime of longtime autocrat Zine El Abidine Ben Ali. It's since made a comeback since he was toppled in Tunisia's 2011 revolution. On to Somalia now, and efforts to rebuild the security sector is underway following a major deal that will see Mogadishu incorporate hundreds of militia from a paramilitary group into the army and the police. CG10's Abdulaziz Bilo reports now on the importance of this move by the government.
The registration is taking place in Dusamareb town, the regional capital of the Galmudug state. Prime Minister Hassan al-Bashir is witnessing the process that will see hundreds of forces from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, a paramilitary group, integrated into the national security sector.
The forces alongside their weapons will be registered and stand ready at all times to defend the peace and sovereignty of Somalia. After registration, you will all be integrated into the army, police and custodial corps, and you'll be under the central command, ready to be deployed anywhere.
For years, these forces have pushed back al-Shabaab, denying the al-Qaeda-linked group a chance to expand its base of operations into the Galgaduud region. Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah remains the only militia group in the country to go it alone against al-Shabaab and record a victory without government support. Somali security partners say the integration is a major milestone in ending security challenges that continue to plague Somalia.
This integration of Al Sunnah wal Jama'ah into the National Army, SMA, the integration of other forces everywhere in Galmudug is part and parcel of reconfiguration, of integration, of building a strong Somalia capable of facing the problems of security that are posed by al-Shabaab.
The process of integrating the forces involves capturing an individual's biometrics and will ensure soldiers receive monthly allowances and other benefits. The government says that these troops will be split, with some trained to form the next batch of police for the Galmudug region. Elections are due in the state later this month, and these forces are expected to play a crucial role in securing the venue alongside delegates as the region plans to pick a new parliament and president. Meanwhile, with the drawdown of African Union troops from the country already underway, experts say that the Somali government will largely rely on Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah and other pro-government militia groups as it seeks to rebuild its security sector that was virtually destroyed by a decades-long civil war. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Families of victims of the Ethiopian Airlines crash have spoken out after Boeing pledged $100 million in support. The company is still reeling from the deadly crashes that killed 346 people within a span of 5 months. Boeing is currently facing a number of lawsuits in Chicago filed by family members of the deceased. Lawyers representing the families of Kenyan victims have dismissed this move by the U.S. aircraft manufacturer.
The idea by Boeing to make this statement was meant to sway the minds of the jury that will be making a determination on the cases that have been filed in Chicago, so that they want to persuade the jury that we are already remorseful, so that the jury can be considerate to them. So it's a tactic, but we'll take it, but we'll fight with it, as it were. So let it not be construed that the creation of this fund has now eliminated the need to pursue those lawsuits that have been filed. They will indeed be done to the end, and those suits are ideally seeking what we call punitive damages.
It is 15 Kenyan families plus 2 from Ethiopia, and we're also making contact with some few Chinese who are in that plane. So 15 Kenyan, 2 from Ethiopia, and we're also making contact with some Chinese so far. There were about, I think, 6 passengers from China.
Rights groups in the Democratic Republic of Congo have condemned the manner in which security forces evicted illegal miners from a mine owned by Anglo-Swiss company Glencore. Clashes broke out between the miners and the police on Thursday, prompting the security forces to disperse them by firing shots. CG10's Chris Ochamringa reports now from Kinshasa.
The eviction of thousands of illegal miners from a copper and cobalt mine in southeastern DRC sparked protests in Kolwezi town. Security forces chased away the miners from a concession operated by Glencore after they defied a deadline to leave the mine. But rights groups have criticized the eviction, saying it won't resolve the widespread unemployment and poverty that pushes the locals to risk their lives to eke out a living. The evicted miners are now demanding for a new concession to exploit. The DRC government hasn't responded to their demands, but the Glencore has issued a statement saying it will continue engaging with the relevant authorities to find a long-term solution to illegal mining in the DRC. Thousands of locals in the area carry out illegal mining to survive. Many of them use rudimentary tools without protective gear. Lualaba province has most of the DRC's cobalt deposits, a key component in making rechargeable batteries. Last month, 43 people died in an open pit after the mine they were operating in collapsed. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
After the break, we take you deeper into why Somalia cut diplomatic ties with Guinea. And multiple generations of stateless people struggle to get citizenship in Côte d'Ivoire.
Data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
A top Iranian official says Tehran should seize a British oil vessel if London refuses to release the Iranian oil tanker detained in Gibraltar. Tehran has condemned the UK's move as illegal and unacceptable. The ship was intercepted on Thursday on the suspicion that it was carrying Iranian crude oil to Syria, which would be in violation of European Union sanctions. Spanish authorities say the tanker was seized at the request of the US. This comes at a sensitive time as the EU is considering how to respond to Tehran, since it exceeded its uranium enrichment limit set by the 2015 nuclear deal. Despite a meeting of the minds in Brussels to save the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, no significant progress has been made. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says there is no sign of any breakthrough to save the treaty. And the chances of a resolution were, quote, going down day by day. The deal will expire on August the 2nd after the United States started a withdrawal process in February, citing Russia's development of a missile that breaks the accord. On Wednesday, Russian President Vladimir Putin also signed a law to suspend the country's participation in the treaty. Somalia has severed diplomatic ties with Guinea following a visit by the Somaliland president to the West African nation. Mogadishu insists that Somaliland is not independent and warns other countries against violating Somalia's sovereignty. From Mogadishu, CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello has more.
The decision to end diplomatic ties with Guinea was made by the country's foreign minister Ahmed Isa Awad following a cabinet meeting in Mogadishu.
We have ended all diplomatic relations with the Republic of Guinea for violating the sovereignty and unity of Somalia. The government of Somalia is hereby ready at all times to defend any and all violations against the country and its people.
The move comes days after the West African nation accorded a state visit to the Somaliland President Muse Bihi Abdi, following an invitation from the Guinean President Alpha Conde. For close to 3 decades, the breakaway region in northern Somalia has been advocating for international recognition, but no foreign government has recognized the breakaway territory. Several countries, including Gulf states, have accorded the regional leader presidential welcome, a move that has angered Somali authorities.
In recent months, we've seen a lot of violations against Somalia's sovereignty by other countries, and it is for this reason that we are hereby inform the world that the Somali government will no longer accept any threats to its unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity.
Earlier this week, Mogadishu summoned the Kenyan ambassador to Somalia for what it termed as an offensive tweet by top Kenyan government officials who referred to Somaliland as a country. The comments came following a meeting by top Kenyan officials and representatives from Somaliland in Nairobi. Mogadishu issued a protest note to Nairobi warning that the statement is an affront to its sovereignty, unity and territorial integrity, as well as harmful to the relationship between the two countries. The government also recently snapped a consensus-building meeting with Somaliland in Nairobi. However, Office of the Somali President says it's committed to engage in constructive dialogue with Somaliland when a suitable venue, agenda and participants are agreed upon. Talks between the two have stalled in recent years despite efforts by several countries, including Djibouti and Turkey, to host the talks. Last year, tension between Mogadishu and Hargeisa escalated after the federal parliament banned the Dubai ports operator DP World from operating in Somalia. Meanwhile, many in the country have welcomed the move to end ties with Conakry, while advocating for close cooperation with Somaliland in a bid to end decades of mistrust. Abdulaziz Bilon, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has hailed the signing of an agreement to establish a statutory National Legislative Reform Authority in Lesotho. The reforms are expected to pave the way for peace and stability. Ramaphosa met with political parties, NGOs and traditional leaders in Lesotho. CGTN's Yulisa Njumela reports now from Johannesburg in South Africa.
This is the first trip to Lesotho for President Cyril Ramaphosa after he was sworn in as the president here in South Africa. Ramaphosa has been on a working visit to the Mountain Kingdom in his capacity as SADC's facilitator for reforms. The president visited the Mountain Kingdom for, among other objectives, discussions with Prime Minister Tom Thabane and civil society leadership on SADC process to secure political stability and development in Lesotho through a broad range of reforms. The reforms agreement stipulates that the Reform Authority would be constituted in terms of an Act of Parliament. Ramaphosa welcomed the signing as a historic milestone that firmly set Lesotho on the road to reform.
Historic milestone because all of them unanimously agreed that there should be legislation that is passed in Parliament that is going to lead to the establishment of an entity, a National Reform Authority that will get on with the task of dealing with the reforms in a firm way independently and deal with the principles, the processes of these reforms.
The authority is expected to guide the country in effecting constitutional, governance, security and media reforms. Ramaphosa praised Basotho leadership for seeking solutions to their own problems.
Solutions that they have crafted themselves to address the challenges of instability and lack of reform that prevailed in this country. I believe that Lesotho is now opening a new chapter, a chapter where they will embrace good governance, proper rule of law adherence, and all the other matters that will reposition Lesotho. And SADC will be delighted to get this report.
Before the signing of the reforms agreement, opposition parties had tabled a motion of no confidence in Lesotho's Prime Minister Tom Thabane. Opposition parties are adamant that they will prioritize the reforms, but they cannot guarantee that a motion of no confidence cannot be passed on the Prime Minister. Tabane has assured Ramaphosa of the Lesotho Coalition's government's commitment to implement the reforms even as he faces this challenge. Yudison Jamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Africa is home to the highest number of stateless people in the world, but governments have only recently recognized this as a serious problem. War, discrimination on ethnic, religious and racial lines, or the emergence of new states has left countless people without legal identification. In search of recognition, many in Côte d'Ivoire are experiencing firsthand the hardships of statelessness. CGTN's Daniela Pearson has more.
It is in this slum, in the Ivorian capital of Abidjan, where Tirogo Benoit lives with his family. Benoit was born in Côte d'Ivoire and has lived here all his life. But because his parents were from neighbouring Burkina Faso, he is not legally recognised as a citizen here. His wife, Sangare Abiba, whose parents are from Mali, faces the same problem.
We need Ivorian citizenship to obtain identity documents for our children. With citizenship, our children can go to school and have a better future. Here in Côte d'Ivoire, they say we are Malians. And when you go to Mali, they say we are Ivorians. We no longer know what country we are from.
We have provided all the required documents, but the naturalization procedure is still deadlocked. When we go to court, we are always given new appointments and it never ends. We have never been able to have even the beginning of a solution to our problem.
Côte d'Ivoire only grants citizenship through lineage. At least one parent has to be Ivorian. Benoit and Abiba's 4 children are therefore also at risk of statelessness. It is not enough for them to have been born in Côte d'Ivoire. In addition, the country of their grandparents, Burkina Faso and Mali, might also not recognize them as citizens this many generations on. This family is one among many who live, work and spend their lives here, but are not recognized as Ivorian citizens. The UN Refugee Agency estimates that there are more than 700,000 stateless people in Côte d'Ivoire. Despite the country agreeing to 2 international statelessness conventions in 2013, the situation for stateless people here remains unchanged.
I no longer know what to do to get this national identity card. When I find work, I can't even receive my salary directly because, since I don't have an ID card, I can't have a bank account of my own. Very often, my salary is transferred to an intermediary's account, who in turn gives it to me.
I want the state of Côte d'Ivoire to have compassion on us. Allow us to have the necessary documents to prove that we too live in this country. We want to be recognized as Ivorian citizens.
Today, the exact number of stateless people in the world is unknown. UNHCR puts it in the millions, including 1 in 3 children. In Côte d'Ivoire, appeals from stateless people for legal documentation remains unsuccessful, and people like Benoit and his family continue to live their lives in limbo. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Well, let's now go to Panina for all the latest business news. Over to you.
Thank you, Karen. Coming up on Africa Live Business. South Africa State Defense Company seeks $200 million bailout from the government. And South Korea's electronics giant's profits plunge in the second quarter.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sudan. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Nigeria is my home. 160 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Nta, an anchor for CGTN.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads, where opportunity meets innovation, where profitable new markets collide with global trends. From the sound of an African bell on a stock market's floor to the shout of the trader in a bustling free market. It's colorful, vibrant, and exotic. CGTN stands at the gateway to Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. From Morocco to South Africa, we talk to the deal makers and actors who fuel its engines of growth. Only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's begin in South Africa. And the state defense company Denel has asked the government for a $200 million cash injection to help it emerge from a financial crisis and secure lucrative export deals. The firm is one of several state firms in the red after years of mismanagement under former President Jacob Zuma's tenure. CEO Danny du Toit said recovery efforts were progressing well, and Denel could win $2.1 billion of deals in the next 2 years if it received help to overcome acute liquidity constraints. He added that he hoped the cash injection would be announced this month and that the funds would arrive in September or October. Samsung Electronics forecasted a steep plunge in its second quarter operating profit, although one-off gains helped it beat analyst expectations. The South Korean tech giant is on track to post year-on-year profit declines for a third consecutive quarter as chip prices fell due to a supply glut and U.S. sanctions on Chinese telecom equipment maker Huawei Technologies. April to June operating profit likely fell 56% to $5.6 billion. Revenue likely fell 4.2% from a year earlier to $47.7 trillion. The forecast profit is better than the $5.1 trillion indicated by Refinitiv Smart estimate that gives a greater weighting to top-rated analysts. There's good news from South Africa. The appetite towards the South African brand has improved. This as easing trade tensions between China and the US boost risk sentiment. On the local economic data front, the news wasn't that positive. CGTN's Angelo Kupla explains.
The latest SACI Business Confidence Index moves sideways, while the ABSA Purchasing Managers Index continues on a similar trend line.
Well, there was a marginal uptick in June compared to May to 93.3, which is not a very good level. If you actually look at it, it's just below the average since 2016 now. So it's not an ideal level, but we hope that we could improve on that level after the President Sona and after some implementation.
There was a bit of an uptick in June, I think, which got people to think maybe things are improving slowly. But I think the important thing to highlight here is that for the 6 consecutive months, this thing is below 50, which tells you that I think even beyond the supply side shocks that we've had in Q1 of electricity shortages, momentum is still very weak in the manufacturing sector.
All eyes will be on the country's Minister of Finance in the next couple of months.
For the Minister of Finance delivering his medium-term budget will be a very, very important event in October somewhere. And then there's an investment summit between the private and government sector coming up in November. And that is an important event because I think it'll give a direction to the business conference and the business climate.
In the meantime, the PMI isn't looking that optimistic in the next 6 months.
But one of the things that we're also starting to see in the underlying data is that expectations about the future are also starting to weaken quite a bit. There's a particular sub-index in there that measures expectations in 6 months' time. It was the weakest in about since December last year. So it tells you that not only are conditions fairly depressed right now, but manufacturers themselves are starting to feel less optimistic about the near-term future.
These two indices show us exactly what's happening in the South African economy at the moment. And unless there's some kind of a change and some direction from government and its leader, we're going to continue in this flatline position. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A publication for trade and investment opportunities in Africa has been released in Cape Town. The publication is meant to give local investors and companies an in-depth analysis into the continent's business market. The report is part of an annually released study of a broad numbers of sectors in Africa, which show markets that are mostly untapped with better growth prospects than even more established global markets. CGTN's Travis Andrews has more on this.
Africa's economy as a whole is the second fastest growing region in the world that will include more than 2.5 billion people by 2050, with a combined GDP of over $3.4 trillion. That's just one of the many insights into the trade and investment into the rest of Africa annual report.
Well, we think that this report, which is entitled Springboard to Africa, is very important because we think it's important to position South Africa, the Western Cape, and indeed Cape Town as a springboard to markets in the rest of Africa.
The report was compiled by the city and region's trade and promotion agency, Westgrow, and the numbers are certainly encouraging. It shows intra-African trade constituting only 18% of Africa's total trade with the globe, which means there's still significant scope for growth for local companies with African expansion aspirations.
Compared to the rest of the world, Africa is definitely positioned for growth. I think if you look at Africa, it's quite a mixed bag, so it's about selecting the right opportunities. But yeah, if you select the right opportunities and you partner with the right people in markets, you can grow way faster in these markets than a lot of the markets in the rest of the world at the moment.
According to the publication, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement will also provide the driver necessary for better market penetration across member states due to the progressive elimination of tariffs and trade barriers. And that means more and more Western Cape companies will find success in having more of their products on the shelves of stores across the African continent. The local government is also assisting by creating an enabling environment to attract foreign direct investment into the region, to establish companies that plan to use the Cape as a springboard into the rest of Africa.
For the last 5 years, we've been driving oil and gas, agri-processing and tourism very hard. But we think that there are opportunities beyond that. Business processing, the services industry, as you say, the halal market, the green energy and the energy market are all, I think, great new business opportunities in South Africa and in the Western Cape and specifically in Cape Town.
Almost 60% of investors.
For now, though, the publication is also available to international investors who are keen on tracking Africa's economic growth with the aim of potentially unlocking business opportunities of their own in the rest of Africa. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
The price of the euro in Algeria's hard currency market collapsed at the portside square in the capital, Algiers. The port is known as the reference black market. Prices hit 20,300 dinars per 100 units after early exceeding 21,500 dinars. The past few days have seen it reach 22,000 dinars for 100 euros. The price of the dollar, which was set a few days ago at 19,100 dinars per $100 unit, dropped to 18,200 dinars. Experts attribute the collapse of hard currency to the presence of a large number of wealthy businessmen who are accustomed to the submission of large orders to the market. Most of them are currently detained in the prison El Haraj under accusations of corruption at a time of market stagnation pending investigations on the issue.
If this decline continues, it will certainly have an impact on the prices of the electrical appliances and the services. I think that the prices will start to decline soon, and the Algerian citizen will benefit from that. I think that the campaign of arrests that affected some of the businessmen who are affecting the hard currency market, especially in the black market or the informal market, is one of the main reasons for the decline of the currency of the euro and the dollar and the recovery of the local currency to them.
Let's leave it there for now. But ahead on global business, African leaders converge in Nigeria to officially roll out the eagerly awaited Africa Continental Free Trade Area. We have the latest from the summit. We'll be live from Niamey with our very own Ramanyang. That's at the top of the hour. For now, Karen, back to you.
Thank you very much, Penina. We are going to a short break. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including animal rights activists up in arms over 2 new elephants at the Johannesburg Zoo. We tell you why.
Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Animal rights activists in South Africa are angry after the Johannesburg Zoo acquired 2 new elephants. Ramodiba and Mopani were brought to the zoo as company for its only female elephant, Lami. This despite calls to have her released into the wild after the loss of her partner in 2018. CGTN's Julie Sher now reports.
Lami the elephant was left on her own when her partner Kinko died last year. She now has 2 new mates, Ramodiba and Mopani, much to the delight of young visitors.
And I think it's so cool that I get to see an elephant, because I haven't seen an elephant in a long time, and she's beautiful, and it's cool that she's like 40 years old, and then she's going to be with elephants that are younger than her.
I think it's very cute because people can see him, and they're better because they don't get killed and stuff and get poached.
It will take a few weeks before the new elephants are trained and completely familiarized with their new home, but for now interactions with their new friend Lami is limited.
They've been housed in a separate area from Lami for now. They've had introductions over the Boma fence. They are able to smell one another, touch one another, but for now they're not allowed full contact. Another thing is the boundary moat that we have here. We want to make sure that when they are introduced, there's going to be no pushing and shoving, and we have, an incident where an elephant ends up in a moat.
But not everyone's happy. The arrival of Ramodiba and Mopani has sparked outrage from animal rights activists who want Lami released.
This zoo is too small anyway to cater for 3 elephants, and we believe that the right thing would have been for the zoo to let Lami go to a sanctuary where she could have spent the rest of her days in peace. What they did was in secrecy obtain another 2 elephants, and all it does is perpetuate the cycle of cruelty about elephants in captivity.
Pro-animal organizations have accused the zoo of underhanded tactics and wasting taxpayers' money. It has admitted to paying more than $100,000 to acquire the elephants, but denies any wrongdoing.
We have complied 100% with the Gauteng Department of Agriculture and Rural Development's elephant plans. We have a moral obligation to make sure that we can accommodate these elephants or animals in our care. And we have an off-site space in Paris, which is 600 hectares in size. And this would be an alternative plan if for some reason the elephants here are not able to cope.
The zoo says the elephants will be closely monitored through the transition, and there are plans to widen the enclosure. But activists are not backing down and are calling for a boycott of the facility. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Tourists and beachgoers in several Tunisian resort cities say a spike of attacks against security in the capital have not discouraged them from enjoying their summer vacations in the country. A wanted militant wearing an explosive belt blew himself up in the Tunisian capital after being surrounded by police earlier this week. It was the third such incident, and coming within a week, and comes months ahead of an election and at the peak of a tourist season in which Tunisia is hoping for a record number of visitors. Tunisia has been battling militant groups operating in remote areas near to the border with Algeria since an uprising overthrew Zine Abidine Ben Ali in 2011. High unemployment has also stoked unrest in recent years.
We are here to make the tourists feel safe when they see us, and to allow them to spend nice holidays and to enjoy Tunisia's beaches.
I feel like there is a huge effort made by Tunisia to make us as tourists feel safe. Additionally, military police are keeping an eye on beaches and hotels.
We've got all the sports news coming up for you after the break, including Uganda faced the Lions of Teranga in the round of 16 amid ongoing pay dispute.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's begin at the Africa Cup of Nations in Egypt, where Morocco and Benin are deadlocked in their knockout tie in Cairo. The Atlas Lions progressed top of Group D and had most of the early chances in the tie at the Al Salam Stadium. Ajax youngster Hakim Ziyech led with most of the attacks, coming close on 11 minutes. Ziyech, who was instrumental in Morocco's win over South Africa, came close once again just before the half-hour mark, but couldn't find the opener for the North Africans. It went to half-time goalless, but it was Benin that would get the first goal after 53 minutes played. Stunning the Moroccans, it took the Atlas Lions up until the 76th minute to get the equaliser after capitalising on some poor defending. The tie will now head to extra time. The knockout stage of the African Cup of Nations begins on Friday. Top-ranked side Senegal will take on Uganda for a place in the last 8. Ahead of the match, the Ugandan camp has been rocked by a pay dispute that threatens to derail their journey to the final. Here's CG10's Adel El Mahrouhi with more.
The Cranes began their preparations for the round of 16 on the wrong footing. Players boycotted their Tuesday training after financial disputes with Ugandan Federation.
Of course, we had issues, but we resolved them as a team because these are issues that happen anyway. It's like anyway in the family where you have problems, but unfortunately in football it's many issues. But these are solved, and we were back on training yesterday, and we're looking at the game which is ahead of us because we've got a nation to fight for.
Friday is going to be the toughest match yet to Uganda, and coach Sébastien Desabre knows Senegalese side is the top-ranked team in Africa.
To beat Senegal, we need to score. Okay, it's important for us to put an offensive tactic against Senegal, and we believe in our chance. Sure, it's difficult because we respect so much Senegal, and we know is is a good team. In the last maybe 10 last game, he won every time with a good coach and very good players.
For the Senegal Lions of Teranga, Uganda is going to be the third East African country they face in this year's Africa Cup of Nations. The West Africans know that the Uganda Cranes are not going to be an easy opponent.
We know very well the football style of East Africa. We've had the chance to play against Tanzania, then Kenya. Uganda, however, appears as a stronger team. They have very special players like Farouk Mia, Patrick Adu, even Khalid Aucho, who I believe has the ability to play in Europe. They are a strong team, especially in their defense.
Senegal remains one of this year's title favorites. Analysts, however, warn that their unpredictable opponents like Uganda have nothing to lose in this tournament.
Senegal's strength comes from its football history, also because they've been considered one of the title favorites. Uganda, however, has two advantages. They're playing in Cairo Stadium, the same venue they've been in since the beginning of the tournament. They're also playing under zero pressure. They have nothing to lose. That will make them play well.
The Lions of Teranga have sharpened their claws for a team hungry to make a football statement in AFCON after being out of the finals for the last 41 years. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.